grateful that she was willing to come back. So, Kathleen Budday, for 25 years has provided art therapy in various capacities, including individual, family, couple, and group therapy. She's practiced with diverse populations such as adults with HIV/AIDS, hospice patients and families, teen refugees, adults coping with cancer, and bereaved individuals, among others. At the start of her career, Kathleen held positions in art galleries and museums, and lived in Duluth, taught at the University of Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Through her work, Kathleen has promoted the value of the arts as a means of expression for persons of all backgrounds, stages, and abilities. She's witnessed how images have a unique, non-threatening way to connect us and to promote insights into our complex experiences. It's become her passion to use creativity as a means to help others to feel seen and heard and to heal. So I'd say this is like such a great final talk for our Coffee at 10 series, because it really embodies what we were trying to do with this season of well-being of exhibits and programming. So thanks for your willingness to be here. Kathleen holds a BA from Kalamazoo College and then earned her Master's of Education with a concentration in art therapy from Wayne State University. As a board certified art therapist, Kathleen is sole proprietor of Healing with Art in Michigan. She's held the positions of assistant professor in art therapy at University of Wisconsin Superior and Millikan University. She's taught at Kalamazoo College. Currently, she's an adjunct faculty instructor for Wayne State University. In addition to her art therapy work and teaching, Kathleen is a published author and presenter in the field of art therapy. And if you'd like to learn more about Kathleen's work, she'll be available afterwards and can share her website.
Yes.
With you. So
Very happy to.
welcome and thanks so much for being here.
Oh, thank you. Well, thank you, Sheila and Alyssa and everyone at Crooked Tree Art Center. I'm really thrilled to be here and happy that you're all here today, because this is, I love talking about art therapy and advocating for it. I highly believe in using art to help us heal. So today, I'm going to, in the beginning, talk a little bit more about the profession of art therapy, which I don't always do, but when I get the chance to really kind of educate people about what it is, I like to do that quickly. And then we'll get into the more interesting stuff, I think. So we're going to start with a technique that we sometimes use in art therapy. And it's just, as you see, a series of images. So I like to do this with groups or individuals I'm working with and to kind of check in. So for the purposes of today, we don't have time for everybody to participate. So I will ask for 1 or 2 volunteers. So look at the images and choose one that symbolizes a feeling or mood that you've had recently. So you're going to look at the images and choose one that symbolizes a feeling or mood that you felt recently. And if anybody wants to raise their hand to volunteer to share. Yes.
The moon.
The moon?
Yeah, and it's just wonder and awe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. One more person. Yes.
It's not really the season right now, but the daffodils stick out because it symbolizes that rebirth, something starting new, so it's hope in the future.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you. So you've already shown how individually we all bring our own unique experiences, backgrounds, cultures to our perceptions of what we see. And we also bring that to our own styles of creating. So it's very important for me to emphasize that when I'm working with people, that we're all unique. We all see the world differently, but we get to know each other and understand each other more through our creations, as well as just how we perceive and interpret art. So to give you an idea for today's layout, we're going to first talk about what art therapy is, who is an art therapist, where do we practice, who can benefit from art therapy. And I'm really going to talk a lot about artistic media as it pertains to art therapy. And then we'll get into case examples and time for questions and answers. But feel free along the way, if you have questions, you can certainly ask them. So let's begin. What is art therapy? Does anybody have an idea of how we would define what art therapy is? Nobody has any, like a word or two? What would you associate with art therapy?
Healing.
Healing, yes.
Creative.
Creative. This is a compilation of two different definitions from the American Art Therapy Association, but essentially it's an integrative mental health and human services profession that uses art media, the creative process, psychological theories, and reflection on that final art product to gain just an abundance of different benefits. There's some listed here. But to me, what stands out is that art therapy is really only taking place when you're facilitated by an art therapist. And I say that because I've run into, through the past 20 years of doing this work, that people don't quite understand that. I've seen people say, like on their websites or in workshops, that they are providing art therapy. And really, unless you're educated and trained in art therapy, you're really not doing art therapy. That's not to say we own the therapeutic benefits of art by any stretch, or you can't use art in a different milieu of therapy, but art therapy is really for those who, and you'll see, were trained and educated in the profession. So we have wonderful examples of people in the exhibitions using art for personal benefits and therapeutic gains. That's absolutely valid. But again, the actual term art therapy is and should be just for people who are in the profession. I like to say, simplify it, it's the marriage of two disciplines, art and psychology. And I like to also say it's like using the language of art. So line, shape, color, form, images, textures to express ourselves. Particularly when we're dealing with really challenging situations, it's hard to find words to articulate how we're feeling. So it's my job to find creative means to help people express themselves in different ways. And it's not at all about artistic skills or abilities. I've heard many times when I work with people that, oh, I'm not creative, but I firmly believe we are all creative. We have a creative core. So again, it's my job, if you're not connected to that, to reconnect you to that. And sometimes people already are, which is a beautiful thing. And so also it's about the process of creating, not the product. And what I mean by that is we're not necessarily looking to create aesthetically beautiful works of art. That might be the end result, but that's not typically the goal in art therapy. So there's no wrong way to do what we're doing. And what I mean by that is, like, I will have a group and have a directive, and it might be interpreted, 4 different ways, and there's no wrong way. I actually kind of like that because it shows me people are tapping into their unique creative core. So art therapy is a master's level or higher level profession. And why I like to share that is because music therapy and like recreation therapy, you can have a bachelor's level in practice, but art therapy is at least a master's level. And they do have more and more bachelor's level pre-art therapy programs, which is exciting. This I like to share because, again, I still run into people who aren't aware of the credentials for art therapists. So the first one you get, and this is fairly new, like the last 10 years, the ATRP, which essentially means you've graduated from a program and then you're being supervised. So you get that right away. But then to get the ATR, which means you're a registered art therapist, you have been clinically supervised for up to 1,500 postgraduate hours. And you can do that clinical work wherever you want to. That's an area of interest for you. And the final one is the board certification, which is the national exam that you pass. And then you need to either retake it every 5 years, or you can renew it with continuing education. So I share this again because if you're interested in hiring an art therapist, let's say you work in an organization, I would recommend looking for these credentials. Or if you yourself are seeking art therapy, it's important to know who an art therapist is. Licensure is complicated because there's not a national license for art therapy. Every state is different. Michigan, we've been in the process for a long time trying to pursue it. It is in legislature, so I'm hopeful that it will pass at some point. But what I like about the licensure or title protection is, again, it's more about consumer protection. I've had people who I've had in my art therapy groups in the past very apprehensive about joining my groups because in the past they've had an experience with somebody claiming to do art therapy who wasn't an art therapist, and they like told them what their artwork means. And I wouldn't do that as an art therapist. So that's why it's important, I think, more for the consumer protection. And finally, these are two really valid resources for you. On the left, the ATCB, if you're looking for a credentialed art therapist, they have a wonderful page on their website. You can type in Petoskey, Michigan, and they'll pull up all the credentialed art therapists, if there are any. And then on the right is our professional organization that really has just a plethora of information about art therapy. So two very good resources for you. Okay, art therapy. Is it a fairly new profession, established in the 80s, do you think? Anybody? It is? Okay.
Do you think through? Is what
Find out. It is not actually, and you're not, believe me, you're not the only one to think that it's fairly new, because it is finally gaining more and more visibility. And actually, the history of it began in the UK. And so here we see Adrian Hill, who was a British artist, and he was in a sanatorium in the 40s for tuberculosis. And he used painting and drawing to help him, gain some therapeutic benefits, which he did. And so then he shared it with his fellow patients. And thus began really art therapy in the UK. And so he termed the phrase art therapy in 1942 and published his book, Art versus Illness, which really talks about his foundation of establishing art therapy as an actual profession. But now here in the States, I like to talk about Margaret Nomberg. She is the mother of art therapy. And she really in the 1940s began to use art more in terms of bringing our unconscious forth. So she was highly influenced by Carl Jung and Freud and did what we call psychodynamic art therapy. So essentially, she believed, that through our images and free association, we can really uncover things that are, suppressed within us. And that's her book. So she's to this day, I really think she influences the field of art therapy. And I want to talk about Edith Kramer briefly, because she had a little different approach, like more art as therapy. So she emphasized the art making part within the art therapy relationship. And so she believed that people could transform, sublimate our more socially unacceptable impulses, like anger, for example. Like when I'm working with kids, they have all this anger built up. What do they do with it? Art is a really healthy, safe way for them to express it. So she developed the first art therapy program in the 60s at NYU. And then the National American Art Therapy Association was formed in 1969. So really, about in the 60s is when it really began to develop in the United States. So here we see an example of what Edith Kramer was talking about, that sublimation is attained when forms created successfully contain anger, anxiety, or pain. So on the right is a woman who dealt with high anxiety. And I love that she titled it Anxiety Pizza. And then on the left is another adult woman who had a lot of psychic and emotional pain. So again, in between our sessions, she actually would create works like this. So when we look at this, we can almost see and feel the anxiety and the pain that this person is experiencing. So what a healthy way for us to release it. And then we can begin to talk about it. And this is a 10-year-old boy. And I love showing this one. So it's anxiety. And I don't know if you can tell, but he on his own, he had a bunch of different materials to work with, poked through that pipe cleaner, to just further show this anxiety coming through. So any thoughts on where art therapists work or with what populations or issues? You can just shout one out. Hospice, yes. I know which one.
Yeah.
That's yes. Yes.
It could be just so many people though. there's so many reasons people could have that need.
Yes, absolutely. And really too many to list. This is just, it's not by any means a comprehensive list. And what I find exciting is when I started, doing these presentations 20 years ago, it was probably a smaller, listing. But now I honestly believe anybody can benefit from art therapy for whatever reason. I really believe that. And that's our job. And I like that actually, to figure out ways to engage people and find non-threatening approaches. So as Michelle mentioned, that a growing area of research in art therapy is with military vets and active member vets for PTSD and TBI. And there's actual NIH supported, grant funded research being done, and they do mass. So I'd highly recommend, I didn't have time to show everything, but very powerful images. And then there's more community work being done, but really it just, it's all over. So now I'm going to talk about media in art therapy. And this is what, again, really sets us apart from, let's say, a licensed professional counselor or a social worker or psychologist who they might use art in their work. And that's, again, we don't own art, but we really are trained deeply and expansively on art media and different processes. So I don't just meet every person that I work with and, oh, draw me a picture. That's not what we do at all. So we have what's called media dimension variables. So the media properties, task complexity, and task structure. So just like in this room, there's diverse personalities. Art media has diverse personalities, and we put them on a spectrum from fluid to resistive. So fluid, harder to control, easier to manipulate. What might be an example of a fluid material? Paint, yes. Any others? Markers, okay. Those, there might be some markers actually that are more watercolor-like. But paints, wet clay, chalk pastels are examples. And even within this category, there's a spectrum. And then resistive allows for more precision and detail. What's an example of that? More control. Yes. Pencils, markers, and even cut paper collage, because it's more controlled, right? It's not loose, and we can contain collage.
Well, it could affect everything probably, right? The more detail oriented, I've done some landscaping and I find myself sometimes with particular rocks.
See, yes.
Turned a certain way.
Yeah.
To have the effect you're trying to achieve, just detail.
Yes.
Oriented.
See, I love that you brought that up, because what's interesting, sometimes I work with people who are really detail oriented, right? And they're stuck more in the cognitive area of things. And so it's hard to get them, to loosen and express. So that's why I will meet them where they're at. And then we slowly introduce looser materials and get that, emotion flowing a little bit more. Because we are all different, which I like. So here, so task complexity is pretty straightforward, simple to complex. So how many steps are involved in what I'm asking someone to do? The more sequential steps, the more complex. Task structure, is it highly directed or more open-ended? So we see here, this is an assemblage. So the directive was, it was a group of adults coping with cancer. And they had a wooden box, so just plain wooden box. The prompt was to symbolically express your experience, your journey of cancer. And I had a lot of different materials they could use. They also could bring in their own materials. And whoops, excuse me, I keep bumping into this. So here is an example close up, but actually going back, I want you to see, where do you think this would fall into this schema of simple to complex, structured versus unstructured? Any thoughts? Like, is it simple or complex as far as the task? Complex, yeah, because we're asking them to do a lot of different things. What about structured versus unstructured?
Unstructured.
See, I like it is. You're right. It's in the middle. Exactly. Because it is. I gave them some parameters, but really every person approached it differently. And I would not present this type of directive to just every group I work with, but I had been working with this group for several weeks, and this task actually took a couple weeks too. So I want to share this woman's assemblage. So she brought in a lot of the items you see here, and she was in her late 30s. She was originally diagnosed with gynecological cancer. It had metastasized to her brain and lungs. So the egg is fertility here. The needles, syringes were for the endless shots she was getting. The dried up flowers were from her garden. She was just feeling so dried up from getting menopause too early and too young. And then this metal item in the center was from her pool that she brought, and she was sick of the mechanics of it all. So this just gives you an idea of the power of art to help people express more deeply what they're experiencing. So I'm going to pose you all a question. So this is, hypothetical. If I'm working with somebody for the first time, so I haven't met them, and they're presenting as highly emotional, really agitated, what media would probably be appropriate for this situation? And I say probably because there's no one size fits all. This is my view. Another art therapist might go a different route. But there really isn't, a cookie cutter approach. But for me, I do have an idea of what I would use. So what do you think? They're highly emotional and agitated. What might we begin with? Thoughts? Finger painting? Anybody?
Like the, like see that you get some of the anger out. Maybe.
I'd like to get to know them better if I would do the magazine collage.
That's what I would do. Yeah.
There you go.
Mhm.
I was gonna say finger painting or magazine collage, but it's just
It-
all there and they can
See, yeah, and
throw it around.
I would do the pre-cut magazine collage because, again, I don't know this person yet. And for me, I'd want to calm down the energy and contain it, because we don't want to have, regression. And actually, that's a common response I get is the clay, honestly, and the paint. But it could,
Throwing it against the
yes,
wall.
exactly. And we don't want, there might be a time when I would introduce that for that purpose, absolutely. But not for this first one until I really got to know the person, made sure it was a safe situation. But you're right, down the line, that might be helpful to have them do that. But it really can, it's interesting, even with adults with finger painting, it can bring about regression. And, I would want to stay away from that for this particular, the pre-cut magazine collage, yeah. And because, so they're pre-cut, so they don't have scissors. And I'll show you here. So it's a structured, so I would tell them, maybe make a collage that tells me something about you. And they're categorized, so they're just really looking at images. That would help, I think, focus, calm, and then arrange, and then we can talk. So this, I'm not gonna, but this is like a really important part of art therapy education. It's a theoretical framework called the expressive therapies continuum. And so you have kinesthetic, sensory, perceptual, affective, cognitive, symbolic, and then the creative level. And we're using both sides of the brain. So on the left is the more logical, on the right is the more emotional. And it's really interesting because the longer I've been doing this, a lot of this is intuitive in the end. But as I was talking earlier, if I have somebody who is very detail oriented and maybe holds a lot in, isn't open to really expressing yet, I'm going to meet that person where they're comfortable. So I would start with the resistive material because I don't want to overwhelm somebody and frustrate them, and then they'll never want to come back for the next session. So we really, we do use this, but again, I don't refer to this. It's kind of embedded in my brain at this point. But it really helps me in terms of the goals I might have for a person, and then the materials I will use and the interventions. So here's an example, kinesthetic. It's pretty, the term itself, defines it's movement, it's discharge of energy, rhythm, action. So any thoughts when this kind of activity might be helpful? Like to rip and tear?
Some of the light bells.
Yes, that's exactly what's happening here. This was a college-age student who was really filled with stress and anxiety, as a lot of students are. And so they first just wrote down, so we're using cognitive actually there, writing down all the things that are making them stressed. And then they took oil pastels and just, I told them, cover the paper, scribble whatever you want, shapes, doesn't matter. And then they tear it up. So that right there is a release, right, of tension, anxiety, cathartic. And then they created this collage. And what's interesting with art, and I said this at my other talk, but I really believe this, is that the art we create is messages from ourselves to ourselves. And so this is an example because we reflect on the art and you can kind of see here, the words will maybe be popping forth. And so I have them look like what stands out to you. And sometimes the word that's standing out has, more profound meaning. Not always, but honestly, I do believe that art is telling us things about ourselves. And the thing is, we could come back in a week or two and look at this piece again, the person that created it, and they might discover other things. So again, it's a safe way for us to begin to look more deeply at things that are going on inside of us.
Safety side is really coming forward to me because so many people can't even express to themselves what really the pain is
Yes.
inside. And if you know you're gonna express, but you're gonna destroy it. So you
Yeah.
know there's not any chance of sharing something you don't want to share. I think that's really a opportunity for release.
And that's a great way to put it. It's when they're ready to share. Like I don't push people in art therapy. And that's where I don't want to get off topic, but there's actually been an article I used in my teaching about, I was in the UK, somebody brought suit to somebody who was not an art therapy practitioner, used art, harmed the person literally physically because they had him create all the negative things in his life and then had him speak to the image and he hit his head, so you can harm people if you're not careful, particularly with trauma. We store trauma in our more visual side of our brain, the memories, and so we want to be very careful if we're going to bring those forth. And this is another example. So this person, it was a teen expressing a feeling. What feeling do you think that is? It's tissue paper. And we look at like the color, the quality of the tear. Any thoughts? Hmm? Yes, anger. So again, this teen identified a feeling that he was having, expressed it visually, and then we talk about it. How can you manage anger? And how does that feel in your body? And this I do use, the psychological numbing, that was very prevalent when I worked with male teen refugees. But again, I had to be careful because I don't want them to regress, so I wouldn't, again, right away tear away, but it did eventually get there. And going back to Edith Kramer's sublimation, they're putting that angry energy in the art materials. And then now we're in the sensory level, and that's, textures, materials, surfaces that we're really focusing on. So in the top image is a woman who's 99 years old, who I worked with in hospice. And so she used to make quilts, and her, eyesight was declined and her dexterity. So I have pre-cut different textures of materials, and even I tried to get contrasting, colors. And so she mimicked, a quilt square. And then the bottom, another hospice patient used pipe cleaners and created her own, garden of flowers. So again, that tactile stimulation of the senses can be very powerful and beneficial. And sometimes when we work with clay, it helps evoke memories. And so this gentleman had early onset dementia. And so he was working with this model magic, which is a non-toxic, not wet clay type material. And he started reminiscing about his time in Florida with his wife. So it's not always about, that's what I love about what I do. It's not always about, expressing deep emotions. It's all sorts of things come through. And this, so now we're in perceptual affective. And so perceptual, we're really looking at form. And sometimes it's helpful to just have people literally look at their pieces and tell me, what do you see? Color, what shapes, very much like the elements of art. And then we move into the emotional affective. So this is from a workshop I did with college-age students. And they were given 3 squares, 12 by 12, of wax paper. On the first sheet, they were to symbolize or express through oil pastels love of self. On the second one, love of others. And the third one, love of the environment, because that was heavy on their minds. So they just, took time, did that. And then I told them to just visually, rearrange them and then, on top of each other until you liked the arrangement. But I didn't want them to think about, oh, what's on top, just visually arrange them. And then we glued them. And so this is what you're seeing. So there's 3 layers. And again, when you look at this, then you start having conversations about the art. Again, what stands out, what color, what shape, and then what is that related to? And several of the students, realized, oh, love of self was kind of hidden. So maybe that means they need to pay more attention to their own self-care instead of doing things for others. And here's another one. So again, you could pull up a layer, let's look at it without this. And it just helps us really tap into what's going on in different ways. And of course, I love groups because then everyone shares and we learn from each other.
So you.
Yeah.
Was that the other one where you took a layer off? What? I mean, this is 3 different.
It is,
ones
yeah,
on
yeah,
top.
yeah, and wax paper.
Oh,
Exactly. Exactly.
that's the green and the waves and stuff like that.
Exactly.
And
You
the
could-
bottom is the circle.
Right, you're right. You can't tell through this. I mean, when it's in person, it's a little easier, but it's very fascinating, I think.
Shows, complexity of the human mind.
Yes, yeah, right. It's all, and then the relationships of all these things to each other comes through visually, as well as perhaps that's how we like behave and manage them in life, so. And you see some people do more representational imagery, and that's okay. So now affective level, what I found when I'm trying to pull somebody forth that is more reserved, or often people grow up in households where they didn't show emotion, they kept it suppressed. So how do I get them comfortable with expressing emotion? Color seems to be a very immediate way to do that. It's embedded in our language, right? Green with envy, seeing red, all these different terms that we know of. So when you look at this piece, so I'll tell you what it is. It's just you wet watercolor paper. The person thinks about a feeling that's prominent for them, chooses a color, up to 3 colors, I don't want to get muddy, that represents that feeling. And they just kind of dab the paint on the wet paper, and then it forms its own, beautiful, like bleeding colors. Then we have plastic wrap that they put on top. That dries and you peel it off. So that's what you're seeing here. So when you peel off the plastic wrap, these forms spontaneously show up. So when you look at this, what stands out, meaning like we're talking about color, shape, form, that type of thing. We're not interpreting, but what jumps out to you in this piece?
It looks like trees, but I know it can't be because it's plastic wrap.
But it does look like trees.
Sunset and trees.
Ah, yeah,
They made it with,
yeah,
I mean, no plan.
Yeah. I see trees too.
Emotionally, it looks mixed.
Yeah,
Red, I mean, just like almost confusing.
yes,
Or look like a sunrise, sunset across a pond and, through the forest.
yeah.
So,
It does, yeah, it's interesting. So sometimes people will add to this piece or just reflect on it. I like having people write reflections as well, because sometimes that draws forth different things. But really, again, like mostly, they're expressing themselves through this color and form. And then words can come in response to it. So the scribble drawing is a very common thing that art therapists use. Margaret Noenberg actually started doing this, and there's different iterations of it. So this one this was a adult woman, just kind of scribble with paint she wanted to. So then the idea is to start filling in the forms, and sometimes images come through, sometimes they don't. But look at, for her, she started reminiscing about her estranged daughter, who she hadn't seen in many, many years, and she never brought it up to me, and I've been seeing her for months. So again, art can really draw things forth that we didn't realize we needed to maybe process and talk about. So kinesthetic initially, but then the perceptual level starts coming through. So any questions before I move into this part of hospice patients? Okay. Yes, sorry.
Get a lot of referrals from maybe a hospice program or from, you know, at military groups, you know, how do you find the people that need you?
It's a challenge. No, no, like the military, I did actually approach, this was a couple of years ago, because there was funding up north here and nobody was, you have to have staff willing to, you know, collaborate for that part. So that didn't go anywhere. Hospice, yeah, it's mostly contractual. It would be me contacting them. Back when for 8 years in Kalamazoo, I worked in hospice. And it was, we were funded through a foundation, you know, and so I was very lucky because this hospice organization paid my role, and I also trained volunteers because there's roles for that. But that's gone, and you know, it's just going backwards, sadly, I think. And so I need to seek it out more than any. I don't have a lot of people at this point that have a lot of extra money that's looking for art therapy. I do work now for a couple mental health type behavioral health organizations, because finally Medicaid is paying for a waiver to pay for art therapy. So I'm working with youth that have severe emotional disturbances, and that's very challenging because a lot of it's virtual because I'm not in Bay City. I'm not, you know, where these places are, but so it's me, I seek out, and usually people are open to it. And if I find a grant to support it initially, then we'll find funding to continue it. But I don't work in hospice right now, but doing this presentation reminds me, I love all the work I do. You know, all ages. So I'm going to talk about Sue, and I'm not using people's real names. You know, I've received signed informed consent to use their stories and their artwork, but I'm not using their real names. So Sue was 80 years old when I met her, and she was referred to me because she was having a very difficult time emotionally with her terminal diagnosis. So I always did, the hospice I worked for was home care. So I would go to people's homes and actually service about 6 different counties, and would also work with family members, not just the patients and loved ones. So I met her in her home, and she was at home with her husband whose health was declining. He wasn't in hospice, but he certainly wasn't in super great health. So she had adult children that would check in on them. And I met her for weekly art therapy visits that were usually 40 to 60 minutes, depending on her energy level. So with any first meeting that I have with someone, the idea is to build rapport and to get them comfortable with the idea of art therapy, and also to learn about them, assess where they're at. So she shared and showed me some watercolor paintings that she had done. And she liked to do representational paintings. So she would usually use a picture and copy it. Well, when I talked about, you know, what art therapy is, which is more symbolic work, you know, she was honest that, oh, I don't usually work that way, but she was absolutely open to the process. I never push anyone to do anything they're uncomfortable with, but she wanted to do this. So like we did in the beginning with the images on the screen, I have image cards that I just find images from magazines, put them on an index size card, give her about 10 to look through, and I try to have diverse images. And for her, I said, choose up to 3 that you're drawn to. And I will, you know, I won't say it like that to everybody. I might ask somebody, choose up to 3 that tell me something about you. So I just, depending on, she has a creative background, so I don't want to confuse people. So she chose these 2. The one on the left, she started reminiscing about her father. You know, he was a very kind, loving, nurturing dad. So she was talking about that. And then the one on the right represented how she's feeling. And she had a hard time putting that into words, but she did say like forlorn. So again, you know, using images can bring a subconscious element. And so I get to know what's on somebody's mind, you know, it's a quicker way than I think just talking. And I probably wouldn't have heard about her father, you know, if we didn't have these image cards. So this is still the first meeting. And so I thought, oh, how do you feel about creating a self-portrait? You know, that's more symbolic, not necessarily representational, but that will symbolize how you're feeling. And she was very much open to that. So I gave her a choice of materials, which is very important. Anytime I'm working with particularly people end of life, they've had so many losses, they are losing control. So to give them choice and control is just another way to provide, a sense of autonomy. And so she chose watercolor pencils and reminded me that this is new to her, but she was going to try. So here's the piece she created the next week when I arrived. And she titled this self-portrait Downhearted. And what's interesting with Sue is she used the image card as kind of a foundation, to create her piece, which is good. I want people to be comfortable. So when you see this portrait, what strikes you? What do you? Blue, yeah. Anything else?
Or even showing more of that downhearted
Yeah.
feeling, what she might have seen when she looked at,
Yeah.
and emphasize that.
And then the hearts, it's like broken heart tears. And so again, we reflect on it. I, again, do not tell people what their art means. I might provide prompts or questions to help them look differently or more deeply. But for Sue, she talked about, the color of represented her sadness, her despair. She was very downhearted about leaving her husband behind, and her adult children, they were used to her being the caregiver, the one they would turn to, the nurturer. Yes. And so these roles are shifting. And I really got the sense that for Sue, this was the first time she was allowing herself to express these more complicated feelings. So in the hearts, it's, we count, oh, there's 6. And she said she'd been married for 60 years. So maybe each heart was a decade of her marriage.
Or so, and whether they're broken hearts or just hearts of, expressing all
The love, yeah.
love and stuff she's had for.
Yes, flowing out, yeah.
Kids.
Yeah.
It could, that's just it.
Yeah, I
You don't
know.
what she was feeling, but it could be any one of those.
I agree, yeah. And again, like, it's interesting because you're right, that's why it's so important for me to ask them, because I don't know. I mean, I have my own view. So I could tell this was, that she was working through things, and comfortable with this process. So for the next visit, I said, well, just continue exploring your feelings symbolically, essentially. And I didn't give her a structured, directive. She could take that however she wanted, because I find if a person is comfortable with a looser directive, it's interesting what comes forth. So again, what's amazing is just she claimed to not be very symbolic in her art making, but when I came back in a week, she had 2 very powerful images. So this is the first one. And again, she kind of used, the image card as a premise to start the piece. So when you visually look, so we're again looking just visually, we don't need to interpret, but what strikes you visually in the one on the right? Yeah. Yes. Up here, the little, you can, and then here. What about, like, for me, what struck me is I feel like the top is darker, than the bottom. Yes. So,
Yeah, it's like a simplifying, like you said, the card and just rearranging it.
Yeah. It is very interesting because she described it as her husband is the young boy with the flower and it was happier times. And then in talking about the top part, she is this little doll-like figure. And then we start looking, okay, well, this is a birdhouse. What is a birdhouse? Yes, this is her, yes. And she's talking about the birdhouse. What is a birdhouse? It's a safe place. Though the entry is dark. So in the end, the top really represented her present, how she was feeling, very much fearful about the future because she's not in that safe birdhouse. She's just kind of not even floating. Yeah. And there's no real foundation for her. And then the brightness, I can see, the happier times. And so this was the other one, which very powerful, even though just using black. And again, you see these doll-like figures. And so with this one, I had her do the free association, which meant she just either said words or phrases when she saw the piece. So here are the words: trap, webbing, escape, stuck, caught, puzzle, sharp, barbed wire, me, fear, cancer. So a lot of different meanings going on. And what was interesting is she shared, her adult children saw these pieces that she made and they were uncomfortable with them because they were used to her being more always positive. But this gives me an opportunity to validate and normalize what she's feeling, and that, it's good to release this and express this and communicate it. And that's where, again, art communicates to ourselves as well as to those around us. And again, the doll-like figures is very interesting. So I only saw Sue for 5 sessions, but she visibly, I felt was relieved of the weight she was carrying. And she did verbalize gratitude for being able to engage in the art making and process.
How do you process?
Good question.
I mean, this,
No, I know, yeah.
I mean, I did this with my mom and it's like, I couldn't see him doing that for a job.
No, I know, yeah.
Working somebody through their final.
It's interesting because, this is where I know I wouldn't say what I meant to do, but you would think, you're not the first person to say, oh, like I've had people say I'd be depressed, I couldn't do it. It's the opposite. I mean, it's a very rewarding, I'm honored, and it's a real interesting energy. It's a powerful energy. There's a case, one of the most profound situations I've had as an art therapist was working with a 15-year-old son, and his mom was dying of cancer, and we did a collaborative session, and she had brain cancer, was barely able to, function with her hands. But that, so you that, right? And it was just me, the son, and his mom, and the family left, which is the first time they ever left. And there was that's, it's a very rewarding, powerful experience. And it's not depressing, it's not. But I do have to take care of myself, and I do, meditation, yoga, and my own creative work. So you do have to take care of yourself. That's true. And I do think it's different when it's your loved one. So, yes. Okay. So quickly, we're going to go through this. Evelyn was 85 years old, and I want to show you this different example because she did not have a creative background. And she actually had macular degeneration, and so her eyesight was diminished. And what's interesting is her adult granddaughter and daughter, who were the caregivers, didn't understand why art therapy was referred, because mom's not creative and she can't hardly see. Well, I saw her for 14 months, weekly almost, doing art therapy. So she was, when I met her, we're going to go through, she was very feisty. She was what they call in Kalamazoo a Gibson guitar girl. So that means she worked in the Gibson guitar factory, and it was a real community of strong women. And so she was just from depression and mood disorders, particularly even when the gray fall and winters of Michigan. And she still mourned her husband who had died 6 years prior, but he sounded like the most wonderful husband. So it's interesting, art can activate the symbolic function. And so for Evelyn, this clock theme emerged and so again, you see I'm using tactile fabrics for her because of her diminished vision. And so she was very resourceful. In between our meetings, she would find materials in her home, so tissue paper-like. And she never revealed, the times on these clocks to mean anything, but I imagine if we delve deeply, they would. So often, I'll hear, oh, what I'm doing is like childlike. And then so I'm like, oh, let's look at Mondrian. He's just doing shapes and colors, yet he's this renowned artist. So this is her. These are thick plastic texture pieces, but she really, again, it's not about aesthetics, but for Evelyn, she really, to me, had an eye, of balance and pattern. It was very interesting. And then these were just blank wood pieces I painted, and she played around with that. Again, just playing around. And this she titled The Boy Without a Face because she thought she saw a movie about that. And then this is bringing art history again into it to help humanize one's condition or illness. So Matisse, we probably recognize this type of work of his. Well, in around 1942, he was diagnosed with cancer and had surgery and then was in a wheelchair. So that's when he turned to doing these paper cutouts. He did have assistants, but he created 270 paper cutouts in the last decade of his life. So here's Evelyn's version of paper cutouts. So at this point, she drew the shapes. I helped cut. She told me where to place them. And we call that sometimes being the third hand of somebody. And again, like just when you look at her pieces, though, I mean, what do you feel, if anything? Like, if you had to give a word to it. Yeah, I agree. Like light, flight, freedom, it's just really lovely. So this is the last piece we did. It's a tissue paper collage. I had a calendar with different landscapes. She chose one. And we framed this, so it was huge, a confidence booster for her, gave her a sense of purpose. And really, she was able to engage in others with her art being the foundation of that dialogue. And so it stimulated her senses, improved her mood. Her depression was alleviated. She really benefited greatly. And then her family got to witness her improvement in her mood. And then a beautiful thing is the legacy that is left because her family now has concrete products to keep. So sorry, I had to speed up that, but I want to end with this quote: art opens the closets, airs out the cellars and attics, it brings healing. And I firmly believe it does that. And hopefully you saw some glimpses of that through the cases. So thank you very much. Sorry, I went